Hello.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us again. We're delighted to be joined by Laila Baker, who is the UNFPA Regional Director for Arab States, who's just come back from Sudan. So I will give you the floor, and then we'll take some questions. And welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Stefan, and greetings to everybody. Happy Friday. It's true. I just returned from Sudan day before yesterday. I've been working for 30 years in the UN, serving mostly in a humanitarian capacity. And we all know that war is ugly, but this is one of the ugliest situations that I have ever witnessed in my entire life, certainly in my professional one. If I describe to you the situation on the ground where women and girls have been stripped bare of all of their basic necessities, picture thousands of women crowded into a shelter where they have no clean water, no hygiene, not enough food for their next meal, no medical care. For those women who have been displaced, and we now have over 10 million people displaced in Sudan alone after 500 devastating days of conflict and war. For those women and girls, they are looking to the international community, and in particular to UNFPA, to provide for them. And I'm here to just give you a glimpse of some of the things that I saw in this tragic situation, and perhaps a bit of hope that I heard from some of the dozens of women that I had the privilege to speak to. I was in one of the women's shelters in Deim Arab in Port Sudan. It should house a couple of hundred people. They're now coping with over 2,000. That is a very crowded environment. And yet, despite that crowded facility, I can tell you that the women and girls who were there felt so happy to just be amongst other women where they could congregate, where they could have access to service, and where they could speak freely for the first time, having been displaced multiple times. And if I think of one particular moment that impressed me the most, I was sitting on the floor with some of the women, and they were telling me their stories, and they're just too many for me to recount here in a single briefing. But there was a lovely young woman of 20 years old named Zainab. She was shy, and I asked her to come and sit next to me. She recounted to me as she very gently whispered in my ear, I was raped. She was raped on her way fleeing from her home in Khartoum, where she had lost everything. She was the sole provider for her family. And this is a 20-year-old woman who should be at the prime of her vibrancy and life. I'm sorry, my voice cracks because as a woman myself, the story that she recounted to me was horrendous. She suffered 15 months of silence and pain until she came to that center. That's where she was able to get psychosocial counseling. She was able to meet other women who had been in the same situation, and she could begin to reconstruct her life. Now, we are dealing with needs that are far greater than what the international community can cope with. But pains me the most is that in a country that once was the breadbasket of the entire continent, producing wheat that they could distribute across Africa, half of the population, slightly over half of the population, 26 million people strong, are now facing famine. For the 600,000 pregnant women, 18,000 are likely to die as a result of that famine. They don't know where their next meal is going to come from. And in providing for that level of devastation, 26 million people is roughly the population of Australia. You can understand the pressures that we're coming under. Now, let me be clear, this is a war on all of the civilians. It's not just the women and girls. But if you take the complications of conflict, loss, both material and human, the devastation of being displaced and losing your loved ones, and where there is widespread sexual violence, then you can understand that we are very concerned as UNFPA about the consequences, both immediate and long-term, on the women and girls of Sudan. In order for us to meet the needs of women and girls like Zainab, we need humanitarian access that is unhindered and unimpeded, something that is really problematic for us. Now, we've been trying our best to work with our partners on the ground to provide medical services where only 1 in 4 medical facilities is actually functioning. 80% of the healthcare system has been damaged or destroyed entirely, and where large portions, especially in the west of the country, are completely unsafe for humanitarian work. And in fact, it's completely besieged at the moment. In order to address those, we need access. We need to be able to get goods and people and have free mobility to be able to provide the care. And UNFPA will work tirelessly, as we have been in these 500 days, to make for sure that women and girls get as much service as they need. I heard the tragic stories of women and girls like Zainab, countless others that I can't tell you about today. But I also heard from them, straight from them, that what they want much more than anything else, more than water, more than food, is protection in the immediate, protection from the raging war, and they want peace. They want stability. They don't want to have to relive this time and time again. And we hope that in this round of war, as the conflict, if we can bring it to a close, not only for a temporary ceasefire, but really drawing the war to a close, that we will also look to women and girls, not only for their immediate needs, but to be that ray of hope and the beacon of peace. Let me stop there and take some questions.
Thank you very much, Amélie.
Thank you for your briefing. Amélie Bottelier from AFP News Agency. If I understood correctly, you were in Port Sudan, right?
Correct.
And what you described in Port Sudan, which in my imagination, but maybe I'm wrong, is maybe not the worst place in Sudan right now, is already horrible. So how can you, if this situation of women in Port Sudan is already so bad, how can you explain to us, did you hear any story from women coming from other places of Sudan, and what is the situation for them in other places where they don't have the access they can have in Port Sudan? Thank you.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
forgive me. These are women who are in Port Sudan, but they have been displaced from Khartoum, from the Darfurs, from many other places. And in some cases, they've been displaced multiple times. The woman that I just described to you, she actually came after the floods. So she had moved 15 months ago, was trying to reconstruct her life, only for the floods to take away all of what she had tried to rebuild, even temporarily. So these are women who don't come from Port Sudan. And just to describe to you what Port Sudan is, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a tiny, sleepy little town that is not capacitated, neither to become the administrative capital for the current government, nor is it able to house the numerous people who have been displaced, much less to reconstruct the social welfare and social services that are necessary to cater to that population.
Ibtisam?
Thank you. My name is Ibtisam Azem, Al Arabi Al Jadid newspaper. I have a few follow-ups. First, you talked about protection that these women need, and many women around Sudan. But could you elaborate there more on specifically when it comes to camps and places like? And then the other question is about financing to your aid operations and humanitarian operations. Could you say more on that? And which other challenges beside access you have there in reaching people? Thank you.
Yeah, it's absolutely devastating. We don't have enough access. There aren't enough facilities, and certainly the humanitarian appeal for Sudan is devastatingly underfunded. That includes for UNFPA and for the services that we provide for pregnant women and for combating and dealing with gender-based violence, including sexual violence. What we have been able to do is provide mobile clinics, trying as much as possible to work with our partners because they are also part of the displacement. Many of them have lost family, many of them have had to flee. So you can imagine what we're trying to do. First of all, accessing the population wherever they may be. We've expanded the work that we have done to 13 different states and trying to get access to even those that are under the besieged areas. We cater blindly to all civilians in needs, especially women and girls. We do not have enough people on the ground. We don't have enough health facilities. We cannot possibly keep up with the level of devastation. As I mentioned, 80% of the health facilities are either just completely destroyed or damaged to the point where they're only partially functional. Now, if you're a pregnant woman trying to get antenatal care or safe delivery, I witnessed firsthand, even in Port Sudan, that is probably better off than the rest. But I witnessed firsthand babies crowded into incubators and warmers, 2 and 3 at a time. I saw operating theaters with no means of prevention of infectious disease control. They're working with limited amounts of medications. And so it is very urgently needed, one, to provide a cessation to the hostilities so that we can put a halt to the devastation. Two, to allow for humanitarian needs and humanitarian access that's unhindered and unimpeded so that we can provide our mobile clinics, get people in to begin to rebuild the country. And then third, bring women and girls back into the fold as well to get not see them only as recipients, but also as the agents of change for that peace that they so desperately wish for. I wish that I could say that we've been able to keep up with all the needs. It's impossible. Half of the population is devastated and stripped of their bare necessities.
Stefano?
I hope I answered your question.
Stefano?
Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York, Ital Press. Thank you for your briefing. My question is, what do you think is the reason why the world and the public opinions around the world doesn't know much of the tragedy of the Sudanese women and population? At least they don't know as much as in other parts, let's say in the other part of the Middle East or in Ukraine and so on. And you're doing this briefing that is very useful for this, but I don't know, TV around the world contact your office to have the same kind of testimony? Do you see journalists in the area? What is your idea why the tragedy of the people of Sudan, it doesn't interest the world?
Well, you're here, so I assume that there are journalists who are interested in Sudan. And my job is not only to provide for the women who are most in need with the rest of our partners on the ground, but to get that word out. That was part of the reason that I went and I made the visit, and that I'm very grateful for this particular briefing. I hope that with the testimonies that we have, the number of visits that we can make, that the voices of those women and girls who so desperately need to be voiced and heard across the globe will be amplified by people such as yourself. We count on the voices of responsible journalists like you to carry that voice and bring it forward. If there's anything that I can do to help you with, please let me know. I'm happy to speak to you bilaterally as well.
Thank you. We're going to go on screen. Margaret Bashir.
Hi, thank you, Laila. This is Margaret Bashir from Voice of America. 2 questions. On the access issue, where would you bring your mobile clinics in from? Would you bring them into Port Sudan, or would you prefer to bring them in perhaps through Adre? And is Adre, since they've opened it, is that helping UNFPA at all? Have you been able to get any of your supplies in through there? And my second question is about the recent ALPS talks. The U.S. And Saudis, they negotiated a code of conduct. That was one of the outcomes from the talks that the RSF agreed to. And they have till the end of August to get the word out to their commanders on the ground to implement it. I think they're still waiting for an answer from the SAF. But based on your experience in other conflicts, do you think that this code of conduct might help lessen the sexual violence that's been so rampant? Thank you.
Thanks so much for your question, Margaret. I really appreciate that focus. First of all, in terms of the goods that we bring in, yeah, we've been able to bring in goods. We now have 71 clinics that we operate, many of them mobile. We do work through every crossing point and every entry point to Sudan that is open and that provides us access. We hope that the Adre crossing point will offer much greater access, particularly for not just the mobile clinics, but some of the recurrent goods that we need for hygiene supplies, for bringing in food and medication, particularly for pregnant women, and for being able to address the sexual violence that we see across the country. As I said, we also expanded our services and our offices in 13 states. We hope that that will also allow us to go much closer to the populations in need. There are still some serious access issues, both in terms of the security on the ground, but also in terms of permission to be able to travel there. We hope that those will also be overcome during the political negotiations. Now, specifically on the code of conduct, I can't speak to the political side of it, but we do hope that it will bring accountability to everyone from the warring parties and allow them also to be held to the same level of accountability, particularly where sexual violence is concerned. The exact measure of that is only to be seen.
Thank you. Before I go to Ephraim, I just wanted to let our broadcasters who may be interested to know that we have recent video footage of Ms. Baker's visit to Sudan available through UNTV. Please go ahead, Ephraim.
Thank you so much, Ms. Baker, for this briefing. A question on the individual initiatives that are being organized in the diaspora. We're seeing a lot of activities abroad by Sudanese, by the diaspora, whether in New York or other places in the world, who are taking the initiative, raising money, trying to make a difference. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit to the effect of such initiatives on the ground there. That's one. And second, I know you don't talk politics, you're just a humanitarian, but as a humanitarian, if you were to appeal to the consciences of the two generals who are behind this war, what would you tell them from your heartbreaking visit? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's heartwarming to see the diaspora. You know, I don't have any comment on the actual financing of that because I don't know where it goes. I don't know how it's spent, so I can't make any comment on that. In terms of what I would say to the generals and everyone else who's involved in this conflict and who can bring the cessation of hostilities to a halt, the sooner the better for everyone involved. Let peace flourish. Let it have a chance. At the moment, the conflict is driving a stake into the heart of Sudan. No one prospers under this situation, least of whom the women and girls that I met.
Thank you very much. Laila, I want to thank you really very much for taking the time to brief us. And please, next time you do another field visit anywhere, come back. You're always welcome here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.